So far with RStudio, we've just been working with R scripts. So R scripts are kind of like text editors that just serve as a workspace for you to write and run code, and then you get output like in a visualization or just some output in your console. But you might have noticed that that's not a particularly efficient way to code, since you have to kind of copy your output into a separate document, and that gets kind of frustrating navigating between several windows. So another alternative to an R script is to make something called an R Markdown file. And an R Markdown file is one of really several of these file types that let you compile everything into a single report without having to leave RStudio. So that said, you do have to be a little bit more careful about putting it all together. So R Markdown, there are more ways that things can go wrong. So I'd only recommend this if you're feeling comfortable with the coding so far and just working with RStudio. If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, you might just skip this, stick with the R script. But if you're interested in trying something a little bit more integrated, maybe making your process a little bit more efficient, I'd encourage you to watch the video and maybe try R Markdown for this lab assignment. Okay, so I already kind of showed you that you can create a new R Markdown by going to this drop-down, clicking here, and then giving some information here as well. However, I'm actually going to provide you with an R Markdown instructions file on the assignment page. So if I go over to this sample assignment page from fall 2024, I have the R Markdown instructions file linked right here. I can download that to my downloads folder. I already did it one time before, so I'll just go ahead and go to the one that I had before. And when you open this, you're going to notice a few things going on. By the way, if you're using Posit Cloud, once you download it to your downloads folder, just make sure to upload it from your Files tab over here into your Posit Cloud or your RStudio Cloud project, and then you'll kind of meet me at this point. All right, so when we first open this, there's a few things going on. The first thing is there's this little bit at the top. This is called a YAML header, Y-A-M-L. And this is just going to have some metadata about your file. So things like your title, if you added author or date details, and some compiling instructions. But I kept this one pretty simple. There aren't really any or much of any specific directions up here. You'll notice some things like code chunks that I'll talk about in just a moment. You'll also notice some formatting here. So I have some hashtags or pound symbols, whatever you might call them. These are ways to add headings, where the fewer you have, the bigger the heading is, the more you have, the smaller the heading is. You can also add things like bolding if you put 2 asterisks before and after some text, or you can make it italics if it's just 1 asterisk before and after text. So you get a sense of what I'm talking about here, because it's probably a little overwhelming so far. I'm going to go to this visual toggle over here. So I'm going to go from source to visual. And you'll get a better sense of what this is going to look like when we knit this to a file. So you'll see some of that formatting that we were talking about. Okay, so let me go back for a second. Now, when I talk about compiling this into a different file, I can do that by clicking the knit button up here. Now, depending on how big your window is, you may not see the word knit, but you should see the symbol next to it, kind of like the knitting needle with the ball of yarn. I'd encourage you to click this little drop down, and then you can choose if to knit it to a Word document, to a PDF, or an HTML. Now, with HTML, that's probably the neatest looking one. However, in our course, we're going to be saving these as PDFs ultimately to Gradescope, and HTML doesn't play nicely or play very easily to knitting to saving as a PDF. So you'll want to stick with one of these 2 options, PDF or Word. Now, I will say you can knit it directly to a PDF. However, there's several things you're going to have to install on your computer or install through R before you're able to do this. So honestly, the most straightforward way to do this is just to knit to a Word, and then on your computer, save that Word file as a PDF. That's going to be the fastest way to do this. Now, before I can knit this, though, I'm just going to comment something out because I haven't downloaded the data yet, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But just to kind of give you a sense of what this looks like, I'll go ahead and knit to a Word file, and you should see something kind of like this once that's completed. I can also knit to an HTML. Again, it's not going to be particularly helpful in this course, but these look, I think, a little bit nicer if I was sharing this in a different form. I think HTMLs are the nicest choice. Okay, let's just make a quick mention about folders on your computer. So right now, these are saving in my downloads folder. And you can choose to do that if you're on a personal computer, but I'd highly recommend saving these to a specific folder specific to the project or the assignment that you're working on. So your downloads folder, mine I clean out really regularly, so mine actually looks pretty nice right now, but yours is probably full of junk. And notice, by the way, that this is the original R Markdown instructions right here. I actually have two versions of it from when I downloaded it before I started the video. This is the HTML, and this is the Word document one. So notice that these are separate files now saved on my computer in the same folder that the R Markdown is. So I think it's always nicest just to create a separate folder somewhere on your computer that you can save these files in, and then when you create new ones, they save in the same place. Okay, so let me keep going now. So when working with R Markdown, you'll want to write your code in a code chunk. So I said a few things here about code chunks. This first one is something that's always going to be at the top of your R Markdown. Whenever you create a new R Markdown, it always puts this at the top for you. This is just telling R to whether or not to show code with the output when you knit this to a Word or an HTML, and it defaults to true, and I'd encourage you just to keep it that way. You don't have to touch this one. The first one that you're probably going to want to edit or add things to in some cases is going to be librarying some packages. So it's usually a good idea to have a code chunk for librarying packages that you might need somewhere near the top of your file. So in pretty much every lab, we're going to library tidyverse. We might have one or two other things here and there, but this is somewhere that you want to start here. Now, a couple things here. There's 3 tick marks that open and close this code chunk. So just keep that in mind. You can also click this play button to go ahead and run that, and then that will run the results of your code chunk, and it will show the output here in the console. It will also show you what it would include if you knitted this, and it was going to show in your knitted file as well. Let's see. So let's say that you were going to library a package, but you needed to install it first. You hadn't installed it into your version of R or your RStudio project yet. So if that's the case, you could go ahead and write that here. So I could go ahead and write install.packages tidyverse, and I could run that code chunk right now. But just a heads up, you'll want to go ahead and either delete this line or comment this line out before you try to knit your file, because install.packages is one of several functions that is not a knittable function, because you can't knit an install command into a file. However, library you're going to want to keep. Library is a way of calling up the package that you're going to use, and you will need that in your knitted file in order for it to run properly. But just make sure any install.package functions, those need to get deleted or commented out. Okay, so let's go down to this next code chunk. So in this particular assignment, I am loading the class data from fall 2024. And so you'll notice in your assignment page, that should be here as well if you need a particular data file for your lab. So I'm going to go ahead and download that right now so it shows up in my downloads folder. So I'm just keeping everything in downloads for right now. Let's see, there's my downloads. So if that's the case, I can now run some code here that will now import this data into the R Markdown itself. I'm going to take away this comment for a second, and I'm going to go ahead and run this code. So readxl is the name of a package that you probably have installed, or at least if you installed tidyverse already, then you do have readxl as well. However, I do need to annoyingly library this package in order to use it, because it's not one of the packages that's going to automatically load with library tidyverse. It's one of those packages that gets installed with tidyverse, but you still have to specifically call it up if you're going to use it. So readxl is a package that you would need in order to use this readxl function for importing the data. So my data is called class underscore F24, and it's an XLSX file type. So that part's going to go in quotation marks right here. And read Excel is the name of the function that's loading that. And as long as this file is in the same folder as the R Markdown that I'm using, I don't have to add anything more inside these parentheses. It's going to find that without a problem. If you tried to save it in a different folder for any reason, though, it's going to say that it can't find this file path. On the left side of this equal sign, that's what I'm going to choose to call it and be using in my RStudio session. So I don't have to call it the same thing. If I just wanted to call it data, not really a great idea because that might get confused with the argument name data in some of your functions. I could do that, and I would see now data here as something in my global environment that is the same file here. So this is kind of up to you, but I would just pick something that's short that helps you remember what it is, and you don't mind writing too many more times. If this file name was like 40 characters long, I definitely want to write something shorter right here because I don't want to have to type 40 characters every time I'm trying to reference this data frame. Now that I've loaded that data, I can go ahead and view that as well. Heads up though, just like with the install packages function I was talking about a minute ago, view is another function that doesn't always play nicely with knitting. Sometimes it doesn't create an issue and sometimes it does. I'm honestly not sure why sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So once you run this view function, just be sure to comment that out as well, or just delete it before you try to knit the file, just to avoid any unnecessary errors there. Okay, let me catch up with my Word document here. Okay, so this is an Excel file. I do want to mention that sometimes you might be working with other file types. A really common file type is a CSV file. So if you were uploading a CSV in a different lab assignment, just notice that you're going to have a different function name here. I forget, I think it might just be read CSV. I'm not really sure. And you might also be reading a different package. I think it's the read R package instead of the read Excel package, if that was the case. So just a heads up about that. If you happen to be importing a different file type, the file path, like the file type, will obviously be different here. The function name will be different, and you might be using a different package to read that file. Okay, now let's go down here to the first little bit of coding for our first question. So I'm not going to do this question for you, but I am going to make something from the diamonds data frame. I will go ahead and plot the price variable as a histogram. So just to kind of give you a sense of what's going to happen. So again, I can click this little plus sign if I want to run this code, and I'm going to see the output here. Also notice that you're going to get a few, in this case, I'm going to get like a kind of a, not an error message, but just kind of a message in general. Now, if I was to knit this file, I'll go ahead and do it for sake of this demonstration. Notice that I'm going to see this graph, and I'm also going to see the code, and I'm going to see this message here. Now, for assignments in our class, you don't really need to worry about this, but in case you're wondering, if you were to present this more professionally and you didn't want these messages to show up in the report that you were sharing with other people, you can choose to turn these off. If you click the little cogwheel right here, you can choose to show the output only. So if I didn't even want the code to show up, I could choose this option. Code and output would probably be what the default is right now. But I can also choose to turn off warning. So warning equals false, messages equals off. So now I'm not going to see that if I was to try to run this. So I don't even see it here in this R Markdown file, and I won't even see it in the compiled report as well. That's especially helpful for like library functions as well. So like you notice in this compiled report, you probably saw, hold on, let me see if I can find I might have closed it. Let me knit that again just to pull it up. So you might have also noticed that with the library function there. It gave you all this junk that I probably don't want to share professionally. Again, for our class, we don't care. It's fine. But if you didn't want that to show, I would definitely suggest just run the code, but show nothing. This is a good example of where I might choose that option. I need this to run, but I don't actually want to show this in my report because it's not really related to what I want people to see. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how things can go wrong. So here are the most common errors. Number one, you accidentally backspace one of these tick marks on a code chunk. And now it thinks all of this is still inside the code chunk. R is going to be really confused. It thinks that this is code, this is all code in here. So if you need to fix this, you can either click that little tick mark on the top left side of your keyboard. So it probably shares the key with the tilde symbol. And I think you just click that key on your keyboard and it should be the tick mark that puts that back to normal. If you're really not sure what you did and how to fix it, you can also just create a new code chunk. So I can create a code chunk right here in our code chunk. Now I've went ahead and labeled all my code chunks in this particular R Markdown. If you want to do that, you can. Q1 again or something. I forget if you might need to be connected or something like that. But that's how you create a new code chunk if you're not really sure how to fix one or you just need to add one for any reason. Make sure that anything you're writing in your code chunks is supposed to be working code, right? So I'm not supposed to answer the question. So like this looks skewed or something like that. I would not write that in the code chunk. I want to write that, under the question that it goes with. And then that will show up as text in your final report. If you have some code that isn't working, like let's say that I forgot a parenthesis or something and I tried to run this, I'm probably going to get an error if I try to run this. And if I try to knit this, it's also not going to knit this either. It's just going to give me an error. And it's also going to tell me where the error is. It's going to tell me the code in lines 96 through 99 is where there's a problem. So it's kind of helpful in that sense if something is not coded correctly. The other most common errors that I'm seeing is people just forgetting to comment out view. Now, this might be fine. I'm just going to run it, and honestly, it's probably going to work this time. But actually, no, this is one of those times where it doesn't work. It does not like this view function in lines 53 to 54, so just make sure to comment that out. If it was not importing the data properly, you might get an error here, or you might get an error the first time that you try to use it. So let's say that this, maybe this data wasn't correct, or it wasn't matching what I was using. Let's say that I was trying to actually use like class S25 or something like that, but I didn't import that. Well, I'm going to get an error because it doesn't know what that is, and I'm also going to get an error when I try to knit this because it can't run this code. And it's going to give me the error here when it first tries to use it and it can't find it. And then in general, just make sure that your packages are libraried if you're using them. So make sure you library tidyverse if you're using tidyverse functions. If I forgot to library this and I was trying to use ggplot, it would give me an error here at the first time I use it. But the error is actually way back where I just forgot to library it, or maybe I just misspelled it. Maybe I misspelled tidyverse. You're going to get an error for that reason as well. Okay, so that should be about it for this. So hopefully that's enough to kind of get you started if you want to try to use R Markdown.